I stood just off stage, fingers clutching the edges of the speech I'd rewritten 5 times this week. The lights were too bright, the murmurs too loud, and the weight in my chest too familiar. Dean Whitmore finished his introduction and turned toward me with that formal, too wide smile administrators wear like armor. I nodded once, smoothed the front of my navy blazer, and stepped forward. The auditorium pulsed with heat and anticipation. Students straightened in their chairs, tassels hanging unevenly from their caps. Families leaned forward with phones in hand, ready to record. I scanned the rows automatically, not really expecting to see him. But there he was. Second row, right side, flanked by empty seats. Carlos Ramirez, me father, arms crossed, jaw set like granite. His expression didn't change when our eyes met. Not pride, not contempt, just stillness. I hadn't spoken to him since last December, when he found out the truth about my degree. Isabel, me mother, had begged him to come. She said it was time. I wasn't sure for what. Reconciliation? Validation? Closure? None of that mattered now. The dean motioned toward the podium. I took a breath and stepped closer. As I passed my father, he leaned in slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Just enough for his voice to land like a blade behind my ear. "You're a disgrace," he said flatly. I didn't flinch, just kept walking, kept breathing. My shoes thudded softly against the polished floor, one in front of the other, like a soldier walking toward fire. I placed my speech on the podium and looked out over the sea of faces, my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. I should have been nervous. I wasn't. I was something else, something quieter, sharper. I adjusted the mic. "Good afternoon," I began. "My name is Eli Ramirez, and like most of us here, I've spent the last 4 years chasing a future I wasn't sure I deserved." Someone laughed gently. Others leaned in. My voice was steady, but the tremor was still there, hidden under the words. A lifetime's worth. I saw Carlos lean back in his chair, arms still crossed. I hadn't even started yet. But he would hear every word. Carlos Ramirez believed in 2 things: precision and obedience. He ran his house, the way he ran his job-strict timelines. No room for error, and no tolerance for excuses. Growing up under his roof was like living inside a blueprint. Everything had a place, and everything out of place was a problem. I was his only son. That made me a project. From as early as I can remember, the plan had been laid out for me in concrete terms. I'd become a mechanical engineer, just like him. I'd work at the plant, take over the systems department one day, marry a respectable girl, and build a family with insurance and a mortgage. He never asked me what I wanted. He told me. Every birthday card, every dinner table conversation, every hard stare after a B+ in math was another blueprint etched into my skin. But I wasn't built like him. When I was 10, I wrote a short story about a boy who could hear people's thoughts. I left it on the kitchen table without thinking. By the time I got home from school, it was in the trash. Carlos didn't yell. He didn't have to. He just said, "If you have time for nonsense like this, you're not working hard enough." I didn't write again for almost 2 years. Even when I did, it was always in secret scraps of paper under my mattress. Files saved under fake names on shared computers. I knew what he thought of writing. He called it emotional garbage or people making money off their feelings. When I told him I'd been accepted to university, he handed me a brand new drafting calculator and said, "Welcome to your future." I nodded, said thank you, then chose a double major in engineering and creative writing without telling him. The first 2 years nearly broke me. I spent mornings in physics, labs, and nights scribbling dialogue under fluorescent lights. Every call with Carlos was the same. "How are the circuits? Still reading your little books? Don't lose focus." He didn't know I was already gone. My mind, my voice, my dreams, they'd long stopped fitting into his blueprint. I wasn't his project anymore. I was my own. I changed my major on a Tuesday afternoon. The registrar's office was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like a confession booth. I handed over the paperwork with shaking hands. The woman behind the counter didn't flinch when she read the form. Drop. Mechanical engineering. Add. Creative writing. Major. Just initialed it and said, "Congratulations." Like I'd won something. I walked outside with the receipt folded in my back pocket. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was carrying my life around in a straitjacket. That night, I told my mom. We were FaceTiming her in our cluttered kitchen, me in a cramped dorm room filled with notebooks and guilt. She listened without interrupting, her hands still scrubbing something in the sink. When I finished, she dried her hands, leaned in closer to the camera, and said, "Just finish strong, mijo. Do it well. Or don't do it at all." I didn't realize until then how badly I needed her blessing. Of course, I couldn't count on Carlos for anything like that. To him, writing wasn't a career. It was a hobby, a delay tactic, a waste of tuition. So I didn't tell him. I let him keep sending emails about internships I'd never apply to, talking about his old drafting software like we were bonded by it. I started picking up side gigs tutoring calculus, editing essays, ghostwriting blog posts for students too rich to care about ethics. My bank account never looked pretty, but it stayed afloat. My fiction professor said I had a voice people would pay to hear. I wanted to believe him, but years of silence take time to unlearn. Still, with every story I finished, every deadline I met, something in me began to shift. Something sturdy, something mine. I just had to keep Carlos from finding out, at least until I had something real to show for it. He found out 6 months before graduation. A friend of his, Luis Ortega, another engineer, had a daughter at the university. She recognized me from a campus writing event and mentioned it casually to her dad. Eli read this amazing short story at the open mic. He's majoring in creative writing, right? Luis told Carlos the next morning. Carlos called me that night. I almost didn't pick up. I wish I hadn't. The call started with silence. Not the heavy, thoughtful kind. The volatile kind. The kind that rattles before it explodes. Then came his voice. Low. Controlled. Loaded. "Is it true?" I didn't bother pretending. "Yeah. I switched majors." Another pause. "You threw away your future? For fairy tales?" My throat went dry. I didn't throw anything away. I chose something real. For me. "For you?" he snapped. "For you? What about the family name? What about everything we've sacrificed to get you to that school?" "Isabel supports me," I said, instantly regretting pulling her into it. "She doesn't understand the real world," he barked. "You had a clear path. A career. And you traded it for a typewriter fantasy." I could hear something shatter in the background, maybe a glass, maybe his image of me. "I'm not asking for your approval," I said. "I'm telling you who I am. Then don't expect another cent from this family. I haven't in over a year." That ended the call. The next day, I got a single email from him. Subject: disappointed. Body: when you're done pretending, let me know. I didn't reply. What he didn't know, what he refused to understand, was that I wasn't pretending. For the first time in my life, I was telling the truth. I changed my major on a Tuesday afternoon. The registrar's office was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a confession booth. I handed over the paperwork with shaking hands. The woman behind the counter didn't flinch when she read the form. Drop. Mechanical engineering. Add. Creative writing. Major. Just initialed it and said, "Congratulations." Like I'd won something. I walked outside with the receipt folded in my back pocket. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was carrying my life around in a straitjacket. That night, I told my mom. We were FaceTiming her in our cluttered kitchen, me in a cramped dorm room filled with notebooks and guilt. She listened without interrupting, her hands still scrubbing something in the sink. When I finished, she dried her hands, leaned in closer to the camera, and said, Just finish strong, mijo. Do it well. Or don't do it at all. I didn't realize until then how badly I needed her blessing. Of course, I couldn't count on Carlos for anything like that. To him, writing wasn't a career. It was a hobby, a delay tactic, a waste of tuition. So I didn't tell him. I let him keep sending emails about internships I'd never apply to, talking about his old drafting software like we were bonded by it. I started picking up side gigs tutoring calculus, editing essays, ghostwriting blog posts for students too rich to care about ethics. My bank account never looked pretty, but it stayed afloat. My fiction professor said I had a voice people would pay to hear. I wanted to believe him, but years of silence take time to unlearn. Still, with every story I finished, every deadline I met, something in me began to shift. Something sturdy. Something mine. I just had to keep Carlos from finding out. At least until I had something real to show for it. He found out 6 months before graduation. A friend of his, Luis Ortega, another engineer, had a daughter at the university. She recognized me from a campus writing event and mentioned it casually to her dad. Eli read this amazing short story at the open mic. He's majoring in creative writing, right? Luis told Carlos the next morning. Carlos called me that night. I almost didn't pick up. I wish I hadn't. The call started with silence. Not the heavy, thoughtful kind. The volatile kind. The kind that rattles before it explodes. Then came his voice. Low. Controlled. Loaded. Is it true? I didn't bother pretending. Yeah. I switched majors. Another pause. You threw away your future? For fairy tales? My throat went dry. I didn't throw anything away. I chose something real. For me. For you? He snapped. For you? What about the family name? What about everything we've sacrificed to get you to that school? Isabel supports me, I said, instantly regretting pulling her into it. She doesn't understand the real world, he barked. You had a clear path. A career. And you traded it for a typewriter fantasy. I could hear something shatter in the background, maybe a glass. Maybe his image of me. I'm not asking for your approval, I said. I'm telling you who I am. Then don't expect another cent from this family. I haven't in over a year. That ended the call. The next day, I got a single email from him. Subject. Disappointed. Body. When you're done pretending, let me know. I didn't reply. What he didn't know, what he refused to understand, was that I wasn't pretending. For the first time in my life, I was telling the truth. After that call, the line between my father and me didn't just go quiet, it calcified. No texts, no voicemails, no birthday acknowledgement, not even a good luck when midterms came and went. The house I grew up in became something abstract, furniture and brick, without memory or warmth. I moved out of student housing and into a tiny sublet over a laundromat. The rent was cheap, the walls were thin, and the ceiling leaked when it rained. But it was mine. Every dollar that paid for it came from my own hands, freelance gigs, odd jobs, and more tutoring than one person should realistically do while finishing a double major. Isabel checked in every Sunday. She never mentioned Carlos directly. Just said things like, "Your father's been quiet," or "He's been working late again." I think it was her way of saying, "He's listening, even if he won't speak." I never asked if it was true. I had no energy left for hoping. Instead, I poured everything into my senior thesis, a collection of interconnected short stories called Blueprints and Bruises. Fictional names. Real pain. The main character was a boy who spoke softly because he was taught that loud dreams invited punishment. I wrote about homes built from silence, fathers who mistook control for love, and sons who escaped by writing their way out. Some nights, I'd finish a chapter and stare at the screen for 10, 15 minutes, hands trembling, not from fear, but from release. Every story was a letter I knew he'd never read. Every paragraph, a version of myself I'd never said aloud. I didn't write to be published. I wrote to survive. Graduation crept up on me like a reward I didn't trust. My final semester was a blur of sleepless nights and deadlines that laughed in my face. But when the smoke cleared, there it was, my name printed at the top of the dean's list. Again, highest honors. 4. Double major. And somehow, I still had most of my sanity intact. The thesis? It didn't just pass. It exploded. My professor submitted it, without telling me, to a national undergraduate fiction competition. A month later, I got an email with the subject line, "Congratulations, winner." A week after that, a senior editor from Beacon Literary Review, a publication I grew up admiring, called to offer me a year-long fellowship. "I've read your work twice," she said. "Your voice is sharp, honest, dangerous in the best way. We want to develop that." I remember sitting in my car after that call, hands on the steering wheel, not starting the engine. Just sitting there in stunned silence, knowing exactly who I wanted to tell and knowing I couldn't. 3 days before the ceremony, the university sent me an email. Subject: valedictorian speech. Body: you've been selected to speak at commencement. Please, confirm your acceptance. I stared at the screen for a long time. I had walked through fire, alone, written my truth into permanence, and now, they wanted me to speak. It wouldn't just be a speech. It would be a reckoning. And he would be there to hear it. 2 days before graduation, Isabel called me while I was ironing the shirt I planned to wear under my gown. Her voice was soft, but the tension ran just beneath the surface, like a rope pulled tight. "He's coming," she said. I didn't respond right away. "I told him it's your graduation," she added. "His only son, valedictorian. If he misses this, he'll regret it for the rest of his life." I sat down on the edge of my bed. "And what did he say?" She hesitated. "He said he'd come, but he also said—" Her voice trailed off, unwilling to finish. "Say it, Mom." A sigh. "He said, I'm not clapping for fiction." I closed my eyes. Not in anger, just weariness. That kind of stubbornness doesn't fade. It just ages like bad cement. "You don't have to let him come," she said, quieter now. "You have the right." I thought about that. About the silent dinners, the cold lectures, the months of silence like bricks laid between us. He hadn't earned a front row seat to anything I'd built, but that wasn't the point. He didn't come to support me. He came to see me. And that was enough. "Let him come," I said. "He needs to hear it." Backstage was a blur, students laughing, robes rustling, tassels being fixed by last-minute hands. I stood alone, clutching the folded copy of my speech like it was a trigger, not a script. They called my name. I stepped out into the light, every footstep too loud in my own ears. As I moved past the second row, I felt him before I saw him. Carlos Ramirez. Dark suit, arms folded, expression unreadable, like he was watching a power outage, he predicted. As I stepped by, he leaned forward barely enough to be noticed and muttered, just loud enough for the blade to sink in, "You're a disgrace." 2 words, not shouted, not dramatic, but sharp, deliberate. I didn't stop walking, didn't blink, didn't break stride. But the words hit their mark. Not because they were surprising, but because part of me still wanted to prove him wrong. I reached the podium. The lights were hot. The microphone crackled. The auditorium stilled. Phones lifted. Hundreds of faces stared back, some proud, some bored, some barely listening. I unfolded the speech, looked up, cleared my throat, and spoke. "My name is Eli Ramirez," I began, voice even. "And like many of you, I spent the last 4 years trying to become someone I could live with, when the world around me kept trying to decide for me who I was supposed to be." A pause. The room leaned in. Carlos stayed silent. But he was listening now. I had a speech prepared. The kind you're supposed to give, bright, safe, sprinkled with cliches about perseverance, and the future. I'd practiced it, rehearsed the pauses, even timed it down to the second. But standing there, eyes scanning a sea of people who hadn't lived my story, who had no idea what it took just to stand behind that podium, I made a decision. I folded the paper in half, set it aside, took a breath that felt like it came from the deepest part of my spine, and spoke from something older than my voice. We're told to follow the plan. I began. To walk straight lines, to chase security over meaning, to become what others can understand, instead of what we actually are. The room shifted. People leaned in, not just out of politeness now, but recognition. For some of us, expectations weren't just suggestions, they were rules, implied contracts, signed in silence. If you stayed inside the blueprint, you were safe, respected, loved. But if you strayed, if you chose passion over practicality, art over algorithms, voice over silence, you became a problem to be fixed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I spent years trying to be the version of myself that made other people comfortable. And when I couldn't do it anymore, when I finally said no, I wasn't met with encouragement. I was met with disappointment. With doors that used to open now staying shut. I paused. In the second row, Carlos sat motionless, eyes fixed on me. I didn't name him. I didn't need to. The kind of silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded. Weighted. A quiet that said people weren't just listening, they were feeling. I saw a mother in the front row lower her phone and look at her daughter differently. A man in the back crossed his arms tighter. A professor nodded slowly, like he'd seen this story play out 1,000 times. My journey hasn't been neat, I continued. It wasn't approved in advance. There were nights I wondered if I'd made a mistake, if I'd thrown away stability for selfishness, if all those warnings were right. My throat tightened, but I didn't let it win. I was told my dreams had no value. That storytelling wasn't a skill, it was a distraction. That nobody would ever care what I had to say. I looked down for a moment. Not because I was ashamed, but because the emotion needed space. When I looked up again, I met their eyes, not as a student, not as a speaker, but as someone who had survived the weight of being dismissed. I stand here not because I followed the script, I said, but because I had the audacity to write my own. And this time, I let the silence stretch. It wasn't empty now. It was full. I let the silence settle before I spoke again, calm, measured, like I was handing the truth over gently. I was told stories wouldn't take me anywhere, that nobody pays for fiction, that passion was a liability. But what they didn't know was that the stories I wrote about pressure, expectation, and quiet defiance started reaching people. I paused, then let the moment land. One of those stories, an excerpt from my senior thesis, was published 2 months ago in a national journal. It went viral. Thousands of people messaged to say they saw themselves in it, that they had lived in the same quiet houses, walked the same tightropes, swallowed the same guilt. A murmur spread across the crowd. And last week, I continued, I accepted a year-long fellowship at Beacon Literary Review. I'll be working with editors whose books I used to check out from the library in secret. Applause started low, hesitant, but it swelled quickly. Students rose first, then faculty. Then slowly, families joined in. The whole room stood. Except for one man. Carlos Ramirez didn't move. Not during the reveal. Not during the applause. Not when the crowd surged to its feet. He sat in that second row like a stone carved from resentment. Arms crossed, lips tight, expression unreadable. But Isabel, sitting beside him, dabbed the corner of her eye with a tissue. She didn't look at him, only at me. She mouthed something I couldn't fully make out. It looked like, I knew. When I stepped down from the podium, the crowd still buzzing, hands reaching out to shake mine, I made a point to walk past him. He stood up. For one brief second, I thought he might say something, well done. You proved me wrong. I'm proud. Instead, he turned and walked out. No words. No nod. just the sound of his footsteps retreating across the marble floor. He had heard every word. And still, he chose silence. But this time, it didn't break me. It freed me. Backstage was chaos, the kind that comes after a storm clears. Classmates clapped me on the back. Professors shook my hand like I was someone they'd always known would land on his feet. My advisor pulled me into a quick hug, whispered, "You earned every second of that silence." But it was Isabel who made everything stop. She pushed through the crowd with her arms open, her eyes already wet. When she reached me, she didn't say anything right away, just held me. Tight. Fierce. Like something in her had been waiting years to exhale. When she finally spoke, it was just 3 quiet words. "He heard you." I didn't need to ask how she knew. A mother knows these things. His silence had shifted. Not softened, but cracked. Just enough. I nodded, but didn't smile. Because this wasn't over. Not for me. The applause was nice. The recognition even better. But what I needed now wasn't celebration. It was closure. That night, I sat alone at my desk. The suit I wore earlier was draped over a chair, and the speech I didn't give was crumpled in the trash. I pulled out a sheet of paper and a pen. No keyboard. No word processor. This had to be by hand. I didn't write it for reconciliation. I didn't write it hoping for some apology. I wrote it because there were things I needed to say out loud, even if he never said anything back. "Dad, you raised a soldier. Just not the kind you wanted. You taught me to stand straight, keep my word, never run from a challenge. I learned discipline from you, resilience, strength. But I also learned that silence can be a weapon. That expectations can suffocate more thoroughly than failure ever could. You wanted a blueprint. I became a blank page. You called it disgrace. I call it authorship. I fight with words, not weapons. And that doesn't make me weak. It makes me dangerous, in a different way. You don't have to understand. You don't have to agree. But you will remember that I stood on that stage and didn't flinch. Not once. Eli. I folded the letter neatly. No envelope. Just raw words. Exposed. At midnight, I drove to my childhood home. The porch light was off, but I knew the house by heart, the creak of the front step, the way the mailbox latch sticks if you don't press it just right. I slipped the letter through the mail slot, and then I walked away. Not slowly, not bitterly, just forward. 3 months later, I stood on the edge of a dusty rooftop in northern Jordan, camera slung over one shoulder, notebook in the other hand. Below me, children kicked a deflated soccer ball through alleys lined with rubble. Their laughter echoed through the broken silence like music stubbornly refusing to die. This wasn't fiction. This was real. I had become a reporter for Beacon Literary Review, covering stories that didn't make the nightly news: displaced families, silenced voices, the humanity beneath the headlines. My first book, a hybrid of memoir and essays titled Inheritance of Silence, was already in production. I'd written it in cafes between interviews, on planes at 3 a.m., in tents lit only by battery lamps and the flicker of memory. It was everything I'd ever dreamed: hard, raw, meaningful. One morning, back at my hotel in Amman, a package arrived. No return address. No markings, except my name scrawled in block letters. I opened it slowly, cautious for no reason at all, and found something familiar inside. A printed copy of my graduation speech. The one I never gave. The version I had planned before I decided to speak the truth. Except now, it had been read. And marked. Passages were underlined in red ink. A few small question marks in the margins. A phrase circled near the end. Success is about becoming who you were always meant to be, even if no one claps. There was no note. But I knew the handwriting. Carlos. He hadn't responded to my letter. Hadn't called. Hadn't tried to explain himself. But this was something. Not forgiveness. Not affection. Something quieter. Acknowledgement, maybe. Respect. In his own rigid, quiet way. I closed the folder and set it gently on the hotel desk. Outside, the call to prayer echoed through the streets. I picked up my camera, slid my notebook into my bag, and headed for the next interview. And as I stepped out into the heat and dust and possibility, one thought settled in my mind like a full stop at the end of a long sentence. You don't need applause to make your voice heard. You just need a stage. And I built mine. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.